Today we're going to be talking about In the Land of Time and Other Fantasy Tales by Dunsany. Dunsany, the writer of King of Evelyn's Door. Dunsany wrote a lot. He wrote an entire mythology, one of the first secondary world mythologies ever written, or if not the first, in the very early 1900s. He wrote fantasy, he wrote prose poems, he wrote, even at the end of his career, he wrote the Orc and Club stories, which are anti-fantasy really. They're very sort of literary detective stories, in the same sort of way that Blackwood had John Silence and that sort of thing, detective stories. There's a lot in here. Dunsany was considered one of the best fantasy writers of all time. In the 1910s, I've got a quote here, he was considered one of the greatest living writers of the English-speaking world. He influenced Tolkien, he influenced Lovecraft, he influenced Edison, I believe, he influenced probably any fantasy writer you can think of. Just incredible. And this is my second take of this. I went into too many excerpts from the start of this book, which are just incredible, so I'm just going to begin. This review will be more along the lines of Clark Ashton Smith's Dark Eidolon. I'm not going to be going into the specifics or the pros and cons of each story for this one. There's just too much to cover here. I'm just going to give a flavour, give a few examples of each story, highlight some of the incredible passages, especially from the start of this book. The start of this book concerns the Pegana mythology, or Pegana. I'll say Pegana for now. Not entirely sure how it's pronounced. I've always said Pegana. Pegana was constructed around the same sort of time as Tolkien was just conceptualizing his Arda and Ea, Middle-earth, Beleriand, the Lay of Leithian, the Fall of Gondolin, the very early first conceptions of his world, of Tolkien's world. But this came out before, Pegana came out before Tolkien. It's the first secondary world mythology. Should be anyway. Don't quote me on that though. Edison may be... They're around the same time. Edison was 1922, I believe. So yeah, I believe this is definitely one of the first secondary world mythologies. Besides that point though, it is incredible. I was stunned by the language in this chronicle. It feels like an ancient text. If you enjoy the Silmarillion, there's a very high chance that you'll enjoy this, the Pegana mythology. Very, very dark and archaic, very weighty language. It makes the Ainulindale look tame, to be honest. So let's just quickly get into this. Let's open it up. I haven't actually read this particular section in quite a while. Just to give an idea, I'll just freeform it. I'll just read any passages that catch my eye. Prologue. In the mists before the beginning, fate and chance cast lots to decide whose the game should be, and he that won strode through the mist to Manayut Sushai, and said, Now make gods for me, for I have won the cast, and the game is to be mine. Who it was that won the cast, and whether it was fate or whether chance that went for the mist before the beginning to Manayut Sushai, none knoweth. The Gods of Pegana. Before there stood gods upon Olympus, or ever Allah was Allah, had wrought and rested Manayut Sushai. There are in Pegana, Mung and Sish and Kib, and the maker of all small gods, who is Manayut Sushai. Moreover, we have faith in Runin Slid. Of Scarrow the drummer, clearly Lovecraft was influenced by this. When Manayut Sushai had made the gods and Scarrow made a drum and began to beat upon it that he might drum forever. Then because he was weary after the making of the gods, and because of the drumming of Scarrow, did Manayut Sushai grow drowsy and fall asleep. And there fell a hush upon the gods when they saw that Mana rested, and there was silence on Pegana, save for the drumming of Scarrow. Scarrow sitteth upon the mist before the feet of Manayut Sushai, above the gods of Pegana, and there he beateth his drum. Some say that the worlds and the suns are but the echoes of the drumming of Scarrow, and others say that they be dreams that arise in the mind of Mana because of the drumming of Scarrow, as one may dream whose rest is troubled by sound of song. But none knoweth, For who have heard the voice of Manawyd Sushai, or who have seen his drummer? Absolutely incredible. I was about to say I'm hesitant to suggest that the writing is incredible, because I know that some people will find this cheesy or corny. To me, it's just absolutely incredible. Dunsany himself distance himself from his this is his very early stuff here. He sort of laughed later on. He laughed at, or derided in a sense, the high style that he used to write in. To me though, it's just I got goosebumps reading that. Sections such as of the game of the gods, the chant of the gods, or the chaunt of the gods, as it's more archaically said. This, for example, is just astonishing. There came the voice of the gods, singing the chant of the gods, singing, We are the gods, we are the little games of Manawyd Sushai, that he hath played and hath forgotten. Manawyd Sushai hath made us, and we made the worlds and the suns. And we play with the worlds and the sun and life and death, until Mana arise to rebuke us, saying, What do ye, playing with worlds and suns? It is a very serious thing that there be worlds and suns, and yet most withering is the laughter of Manawyd Sushai. And when he arises from resting at the last, and laughs at us for playing with worlds and suns, we will hastily put them behind us, and there shall be worlds no more. Concerning Sish, the destroyer of hours, the sayings of Slid, whose soul is by the sea, the deeds of Mung, lord of all deaths between Pegana and the Rim. Of Yornahaf Lahai, the god of little dreams and fancies. The first part of this book, just so we don't get lost in the excerpts, because it's quite enjoyable and entertaining to read these excerpts. The first part of this book is Pegana mythology. It doesn't cover everything though. The main, let me just check my notes. I believe the main Pegana mythology is in here. It's included. It's the Gods of Pegana, which is the full thing, the full sort of chronicle, which isn't too long, unfortunately. And then after the Gods of Pegana comes a few short stories from Time and the Gods, which Dunsany later wrote. Of Dorozan, whose eyes regard the end. There's an incredible section called Of the Thing That Is Neither God Nor Beast, which concerns a prophet called Yadin, who leaves the desert of Bodrahan on a flamingo out into the outer cosmos, and he flies and goes out into the outer cosmos and meets a being called Trogul, or It, or the Thing, who turns a book of black and white pages. And I believe, actually, let's read this. So he's travelled out into space. Then there is neither south nor east nor west, but only north and beyond. There is only north of it where lie the worlds, and beyond it where lies the silence. And the rim is a mass of rock that were never used by the gods when they made the worlds, and on it sat Trogul. Trogul is the thing that is neither god nor beast, who neither howls nor breathes, only it turns over the leaves of a great book, black and white, forever until the end. And all that is to be written is in the book, and also all that was. When it turneth a black page, it is night, and when it turneth a white page, it is day. Yonaf the prophet. Man must endure the days that are, for the gods have left him his ignorance as a solace. Seek not to know. Thy seeking will weary thee, and thou wilt return much worn, to rest at last about the place from whence thou settest out upon thy seeking. Seek not to know. Even I, Yonaf, the olden prophet, burdened with the wisdom of great years, and worn with seeking, know only that man knoweth not. There's an incredible one where it concerns a prophet who scorns Mung, the god of death. It's called Of the Calamity That Befell Yun Ilara by the Sea, and of the building of the Tower of the Ending of Days. This is reminding me why I love Dunsany. He has this weighty language, but then he also has. There's just too much. I'll go into that later on. And Yun Ilara builded a tower towards the sea that looked upon the setting of the sun, and he called it the Tower of the Ending of Days. And about the ending of the day would you and Alara go up to his tower's top, and look towards the setting of the sun, to cry his curses against Mung, saying, O Mung, whose hand is against the sun, who men abhor but worship because they fear thee. Here stands and speaks a man who fears thee not, assassin lord of murder and dark things, abhorrent, merciless, make thou the sign of Mung against me when thou wilt. But until that silence settles upon my lips because of the sign of Mung, I will curse Mung to his face. I'll just read this last section, or second last section, the river. Just a section of it, just an excerpt of it. And the name of the river is Imrana, the river of silence. All they that be weary of the sound of cities and very tired of clamour creep down in the night time to your Naheflahai's ship, and going aboard it lie down upon the deck, and pass from sleeping to the river, while Mung behind them makes the sign of Mung because they would have it so. And lying there upon the deck among their own remembered fancies and songs that were never sung, they drift up Imrana ere the dawn, where the sound of the cities come not, nor the voice of the thunder is heard, nor the midnight howl of pain as he gnaws at the bodies of men, and far away and forgotten bleat the small sorrows that trouble all the worlds. Negative points about collections is that, especially with fantasy, and fantasy that includes a lot of names, for example, it's very, very difficult to remember some of these names in the conceptions. For example, I don't remember Kamazan or Naidun, or, for example, a short story that's 10 pages long might have, for example, actually let's check this, Alata, Zun, Karnif So, Zinar, Karida, Hebif, Ebnon. Of course, it's just to give flavour to the text and make it feel to have some way of historicity to it. But for me, I think sometimes it can feel a little bit overwhelming, and when I open the book, it feels like I don't remember reading it at all. Of course, the imagery is what matters, and the sort of impression that lingers. But it's a bit unfortunate to open some of these short stories and sit and think, I don't remember this. Just a little bit too much, I think. I think it would have been better if it was just focuses on a couple of characters. And of course, I'm on page 62, and I just read a bunch of names there, and we've got nearly 400 pages, so there's quite a lot of names in this book, even for short stories. There's a short story here where after the Pegana mythology, the main section of it, and after a few short stories that were taken from Time and the Gods, which is the other sort of Pegana related text that was published originally. There's a story called The Fall of Babelkund. I'm not entirely sure why it's included here, because it's in the section of Pegana and environs. However, it's clearly not based on the Pegana mythology. I never quite figured that out. However, I'll probably read this to begin the non-Pegana sections. This is incredible again. It does follow the same sort of archaic language though. The Fall of Babelkund. I said, I will arise now and see Babelkund, city of marvel. She is of one age with the earth. The stars are her sisters. Pharaohs of the old time, coming conquering from Araby, first saw her, a solitary mountain in the desert, and cut the mountain into towers and terraces. They destroyed one of the hills of God, but they made Babelkund. She is carven, not built. Her palaces are one with her terraces. There is neither join nor cleft. Hers is the beauty of the youth of the world. She deemeth herself to be the middle of the earth, and have 4 gates facing outward to the nations. There sits outside her eastern gate a colossal god of stone. His face flushes with the lights of dawn. When the morning sunlight warms his lips, they part a little, and he giveth utterance to the words Un. I love that sort of thing. I absolutely love that sort of thing. Actually, that reminds me of... Interestingly, that reminds me a lot of Clark Ashton Smith's prose poem, The Image of Bronze and the Image of Iron. That may be a motif actually in mythology and legend and history, where a statue speaks. I think there's a connection there. There's an incredible story later on, about page 100, called The Sword of Welleran. It's more along the lines of sword and sorcery. It really feels like quintessential fantasy to me. It's about a young boy who dreams of wielding the Sword of Welleran of his ancestors. Thou hast a longing to hold the Sword of Welleran. Take up the sword in thy hand. But Rold said, What should a man do with the Sword of Welleran? And the soul of the old captain said to the dreamer, It is a good sword to hold. Take up the Sword of Welleran. And Rold, still sleeping and speaking aloud, said, It is not lawful. None may touch the sword. And Rold turned to go. Then a great and terrible cry arose in the soul of Welleran. All the more bitter, Welleran's a ghost at this point. All the more bitter for that he could not utter it, and it went round and round his soul, finding no utterance, like a cry evoked long since by some murderous deed, some old haunted chamber that whispered through the ages heard by none. And the soul of Welleran cried out to the dreams of Rold, Thy knees are tied, thou art fallen in a marsh, thou canst not move. And the dreams of Rold said to him, Thy knees are tied, thou art fallen in a marsh. And Rold stood still before the sword. He's trying to... the spirit of the ancient warrior is trying to force the child to take the sword for a good deed. It's been told there's a law not to touch the venerated Sword of Welleran. I'll leave that there though. An incredible story. Really quite a lot of variety in these stories. One of them is The Kith of the Elf Folk. It's a hybrid story where it's a fairy story set in the real world, set in London, for example, in a village in England, I believe, about fairy. Quite evocative, actually, of the section in The King of Elfland's Daughter where they're in a marsh and the marsh lights appear. It has that sort of vibe to it. And then there's a story called The Ghosts, which is a more Victorian sort of supernatural story that ends with a passage like this. This concerns a man who is trying not to succumb to fear of the supernatural. So he says this to himself. If two straight lines cut one another, I said, the opposite angles are equal. Let A, B, C, D cut one another at E. Then the angles CEA, CEB equal two right angles. Also CEA, AED equal two right angles. He's trying to use logic to dispel the supernatural. It really is. It's quite interesting, the variety in this book, only on page 123. One of my absolutely favourite stories, I'm just looking through it, and The Fortress Unvanquishable, save for Sacnoth. It's about a warrior called Leothric, which is interestingly similar to Alveric from The King of Elfland's Daughter, who defeats a dragon crocodile called Thara Gavarug, and uses the hide to create a sword. But that's just the beginning of the story. It concerns a quest to defeat an evil wizard, and it really feels, it's so the imagery is incredible. He goes through this. It almost feels like it almost feels like a world inside of like a microcosm. It feels like, for example, we'll have camels, Arabians on camels, or Arabs on camels, coming through dark passages. We'll have golden dragons flying through dark alleyways. We'll have I believe there's one section where there's a huge spider, I believe, and there's a court as well. Actually, if you play any video games, it feels a bit like a raid, in the sense that there's a lot of different wings, and there's a court of nobles. It's a little bit like Karazhan, if that makes any sense to you. I know it will make sense to a few people watching. really incredible. And at the end, there's a battle with this wizard, again, Leothric versus this dark wizard. The citadel changes shape, and it just feels very fantastical. It's brilliant. On to the prose poems now. Quite varied as well. We have Charon, which is one of the prose poems that I read, actually. My first reading. I'm planning to do more of those. Charon is incredible. We have one called Carcassonne. I believe that's or Carcassonne. I just have to read near the end of this one. It's a little bit spoilery, but it's just phenomenal. This is a story called Carcassonne. It's a very sort of medieval story. Feels like a traditional medieval story about a band of knights or warriors who are trying to reach Carcassonne, a legendary city or settlement. Just if I remember correctly, I've not looked at this one in a while, but I remember it being the language being incredible. This is near the end. But when the morning came, they remembered their war with fate, and their old resolve to come to Carcassonne, and the voice of Arleon rose in a quivering song, and snatches of music from his old harp, and he stood up and marched with his face southwards as he had done for years, and behind him Camarac went. Camarac's the leader. And when at last he climbed from the third valley and stood on the hill summit in the golden sunlight of evening, their aged eyes saw only miles of forest and the birds going to roost. Their beards were white, and they had travelled very far and hard. It was the time with them when a man rests from labours and dreams, and light sleep of the years that were, and not of the years to come. Long they looked southwards, and the sun set over the remoter forests, and glowworms lit their lamps, and the inspiration of Arleon rose and flew away forever, to gladden, perhaps, the dreams of younger men. And Arleon said, "My king, I know no longer the way to Carcassonne." And Camarac smiled, as the aged smile, with little cause for mirth, and said, "The years are going by us like huge birds, whom doom and destiny, and the scheme of gods have frightened up out of some old grey marsh, and it may well be that against these no warrior may avail, and that fate has conquered us, and that the quest has failed." And after this they were silent. There's a lot of stories that deal with time and growing old in this collection. Stories in here really, a lot of variation. There's, even just going past a couple of pages, there's The Wonderful Window, which is about a man who discovers a fantasy world inside of through a window. And he tries to save it, which is inspirational. Let's just say for the fantasy that I write. I'm quite interested in borderlands and thresholds and gateways into other worlds. Let's put it that way. It's called Golden Dragon City, and he for a brief part of his life is inveigled in this conflict in Golden Dragon City. Another banner went down upon a tower. Then he saw all. The golden dragons were being beaten, his little golden dragons. The men of the bear were coming under the window. Whatever he threw from that height would fall with terrific force. Fire irons, coal, his clock. Whatever he had, he would fight for his little golden dragons yet. Near the end of the book, there's quite a lot of short stories or prose poems that deal with a combination of fantasy and reality. There's one called The Development of the Rosewood Estate, which for me is it was poignant but also quite funny as well. It's about a painter who encounters a satyr in his garden, and then the couple, the husband and wife, have to figure out a way to keep this secret. And I'll give you an idea of where the story goes. And then came an open motor, and in it reclined a man with sun-tanned skin, sharp aquiline features, small grey beard and rather foreign expression, in a coat of luxurious fur, with a cigar in his fingers on his right hand and one large diamond shining on one of them. His passage through the street seemed to change its whole aspect. It was dull no longer. I turned to my next neighbour, who chanced to be Jorkens, to make some comment on this rare personality, and I saw, as I turned, that everyone else seemed a little stirred by him too. "He's gone up a lot in the world," said Jorkens. Was it envy that made him say this? "Who?" I said in order to draw Jorkens. "That fellow," said Jorkens, pointing to the man in the new car. "Satirides, the Greek financier." So you can probably see where the story goes. It's about capitalism. It's about wealthy, rich people. It's about development of nature, and why that's perhaps not a great thing. You can see there the combination of the quite humorous Satirides, the Greek financier. You can probably tell what happened to the satyr that they found in the garden. I'm not going to explain this next one. I'm just going to read this. It's called The Policeman's Prophecy, but put that aside for now. "What a noise we made, but it will all be forgotten. What a mess we made with our hoardings, what a glare in the sky. But a few clean winds will tidy the hoardings up, and the sky above London will return to its stars, as a patient from fever to health. And who will remember, when all these things are forgotten? Who will remember at all? Who will look at the soft green mounds and recall man's angular houses, and remember that we were here? The dog will remember. On some night when he is not hunting, some dog may stray from his pack, and in a clearing of young woods of lime, growing dense by the banks of the Thames, may suddenly see his old enemy, the full moon, rising huge over weed-covered houses. At once he will lift his head and cry out to warn man. Not a voice will answer him, not a harsh, ungrateful cry, which he never resented of old, for he never asked for man's gratitude. It used to be enough to warn him and guard him, without looking for recompense. And now not a voice would come, except perhaps for a dog far off in the marshes passing the warning on, and the quiet mutter of geese. And suddenly he will remember then, man has not been seen for years. He will be sorry at that, and think of all we've done, so far as he can understand it, and will think of our motives and praise them. Not the motives we knew, even historians likely as not miss them, but those divine purposes, mysterious, almost inscrutable, that he guessed at and credited to us and humbly revered. Don't let us be too greatly elated at that reverence that may outlast us, for it will not come so much from our own deserts as from the depths of the fathomless loyalty that is in the heart of the dog." I will just end with I'll read the entirety of this prose poem called Poseidon, which has stuck in my mind for quite a while actually. So you can really see the variety of this book. Quite a lot of stuff. I've actually skipped the York and Club stories. I've skipped an adventure out into space, which is a kind of a sci-fi story. But this is called Poseidon, a prose poem. The sun was slanting towards the Peloponnese when I came to the temple of Poseidon. Its columns by the sheer edge of the land appeared to be absorbing the gold of the sunlight, and almost to be about to turn into golden air. If that was a fancy, it faded when I drew nearer. When I came to the columns, the fancy was gone. Mountains and islands lay in a semicircle round the sea, and were beginning to draw imperceptibly about them the purple cloaks they are wont to wear at evening. When I went into the temple, I saw no one there, but after gazing a while over the sea, I noticed sitting among the weeds a little quiet old man. He never spoke a word till I spoke to him, and then, whatever it was that I said, he sighed and told me these days were not like the old days. "What do you do?" I asked, thinking perhaps he followed some trade which changing times had ruined. "Nothing now," he said. "I have retired. I do nothing now." He sighed and said no more. "And what used you to do?" I asked. "Ah," he said. "Ah, I used to shake the earth, literally shake it. I used to alarm men living miles inland." "Alarm them?" I said. "Certainly," he replied. 9 miles inland, and even further than that, and they used to sacrifice to me in this temple. Bulls, great numbers of bulls, fine bulls that bled beautifully, and the very earth shaking while they sacrificed. Those were the days. Those were the days. I used to make storms in those days that shook the very earth. They knew where I was beginning." "Certainly I was," he said. "This is my temple." "And they no longer sacrifice to you?" I asked. "That certainly is the case," he said. That is the trouble. When they sacrifice again, I shall shake the very earth. But men are neglectful and indolent, not like their grandsires. Why, I've seen as many as 50 bulls at one time in this temple. And why don't you shake the earth? I asked him. Well, you can't do much without the blood of bulls, he said. You can't expect strength to shake the earth without the blood of bulls. Of course, they will sacrifice to me again, probably quite soon, but just now they are indolent and neglectful. But why should they sacrifice to you? I asked. It is their duty, he said sharply. And then I did what you should never do when talking of any religion. I tried to argue. But usedn't they to sacrifice to prevent you shaking the earth? I asked. Certainly, he replied. Then why should they sacrifice to make you strong enough to do it again? I said. But the argument got me nowhere. Argument on such subjects never does. He merely lost interest, and as he lost interest he faded, till his outline and face and beard and tarred cloak were little vivider than the evening air. And then a hummingbird hawk moth came dashing up and hung by a flower upon vibrating wings, and the old god moved away from it. What is all its hurry about? I heard him say petulantly. Why can't it be placid? I never hurry like that. There is no need for it, no need at all. And I think he pretended to me to depart of his own free will, but he was obviously wafted away by the draught from the wings of the hummingbird hawk moth. That stuck with me for quite a long time, that one. This old god, who is barely in the mind of man, wafted away by the little wind created by a hummingbird hawk moth. So that actually inspired one of a short story that I wrote about a nature spirit who is blown away by the sound of trumpets of man, who just wafts away in the wind. Anyway, I'll leave it there. There's quite a lot here, as you can probably tell. Highly recommend the book. Some lesser stories, some absolutely incredible stories. That's been Lord Dunsany's In the Land of Time and Other Fantasy Tales. Thanks for watching.